I think one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century was Alistair MacIntyre. MacIntyre had quite a journey of faith from being a total nothing, as he said, to someone who came through the radicalization of Marxism, then the inevitable disappointment that accompanies all the apostles of socialism, and then to a type of Christianity, and finally to Catholicism. It's interesting that he said what happened is he started to read Scripture so that he could refute Scripture because it drove him crazy. And he said, in the end, you have to ask yourself, what are we about? What are we for? And it's in that light that I think when St. Paul speaks in 1 Corinthians 4, 1-5, I think is especially relevant for us. Thus should one regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God. Now it is of course required of stewards that they be found trustworthy. It does not concern me in the least that I be judged by you or by any human tribunal. I do not even pass judgment on myself. I am not conscious of anything against me, but I do not thereby stand acquitted. The one who judges me is the Lord. Therefore, do not make any judgment before the appointed time until the Lord comes, for he will bring to light what is hidden in darkness, and will manifest the motives of our hearts, and then everyone will receive due praise from God. For he will bring to light whatever is hidden in darkness, and will manifest the motives of our hearts. If we are really to take seriously our role, it means that we have to be able to be critical about how we examine culture. MacIntyre said that is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do because we are part of our culture. And we think we can step aside and look at things in objectivity, but it's very, very difficult to do. I remember reading his famous work After Virtue, and the last page of After Virtue is famous. And it sprang to mind because I was doing CTV or CFTO's commentary on the death of Pope John Paul II, on the interregnum between the papacies, and on the convocation and the election of Pope Benedict XVI. And you may not believe this, but it's true. I was having my confession heard and downtown at St. Patrick's in Toronto, and my cell phone went off. And I said, Father, make it fast, I gotta go. They've elected the Pope, I've gotta go. And so the first miracle of Pope John Paul II was the fact that the Don Valley Parkway was cleared for me to go racing up the Don Valley, zip into the Agincourt press room, and I literally sat down in the chair, and you may, I'm sure, remember that they walked out onto the loggia and said, Habemus Papam, and they announced Joseph, and I said, I didn't know I said it out loud, but I said out loud, good heavens, they've elected Ratzinger. And sure enough, it was Joseph Ratzinger who, of course, took the name Benedict. And immediately, this passage came to me. MacIntyre said, it is not as if you can just look at one part of history and have it automatically reflected in another part of history. But, he said, it is a good thing to be able to look at the lessons one can draw from one part of history to another part of history. If you think of the end of the Roman Empire, he said, people didn't know they were living through the end of the Roman Empire. They thought they were just living in the midst of their world and the Roman Empire would go on. It was only much, much later that people realized that that had been the Roman Empire's finish or demise. He said, as people lived their lives, they didn't shore up the imperium. Instead, they were building different kinds of community, different ways of living. They were actually formulating whole different worldviews. It is much the same, he said, in our own time, except, of course, for the fact that the barbarians are not at our gates, but that they have been ruling us for quite some time. And that we are waiting now not for another Trotsky or for another Godot, but for a new and doubtless very different Saint Benedict. It's very interesting. When the Holy Father took Benedict as his name, he took it because of Saint Benedict, one of the patrons of Europe, the co-patron of Europe, but also because of Benedict XV, who tried desperately to be able to limit the problems, the evils of World War I, and to be able to even shorten World War I, but seemed not to succeed. If you ever go to St. Peter's, you'll see the tomb of St. Benedict. I find it rather sad. You'll see a plane bombing or strafing a village and refugees, etc. But Benedict changed the papacy in the First World War and shortly afterwards. He literally threw open the vaults and he impoverished the papacy. They had to borrow money to bury Benedict. And thereby, in effect, he started the walking out of that prison of the Vatican that the papacy had been in since the fall of the Papal States. It meant that even though he didn't know it, he was formulating a new way to deal with a new world. And we have to do that as well. We have to be able to remember that John Paul was exactly right in 1995 when he wrote the Gospel of Life, Evangelium Vitae, as in all of the works that he did for the church. He always starts off and he says, look at the shadows and the lights, the difficulties and problems, and let's look at them unflinchingly, because only then can you make a really good diagnosis. Look at the problems, right? And then look at the lights. Look at where the grace of God is active, and thereby we are looking at not only fighting a culture of death, but building a culture of life. And what's it going to mean to build up a new culture? Most people say, well, I'm ready to work on a project. And that's a difficulty that we have. A difficulty that we have is people are extraordinarily loath to commit. You know that, because there's not many of you. People are very loath to commit. Why is it that at least 90, if not 95%, of the people that we're going to be training in marriage are living together in a common law relationship? And increasingly, it's not their first common law relationship. Really serious problems of commitment. Francis Fukuyama said that people want to be able to have a low entrance fee and an easy exit strategy. Isn't that true? When I was arguing with someone 2 years ago about the Terry Fox Run and where some of the monies that is raised in the Terry Fox Run are going, in this case into stem cell research, destructive embryonic stem cell research, he said, well, we have another bigger problem. I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, we can get people to do the run. We can get people to have fun for a day or do whatever, but we can't get people to run the organization. You know? Commitment is a massive problem within our society. How then are we going to have people commit in a project which is a multi-generational project? Because it is a multi-generational project to build up a new culture. It means you have to examine one's culture. Of what does the culture consist that we can say that it is a culture of death? I would say that to look at it as a culture of death, we need to be able to say that individuals are not open to the possibilities that are there for true human flourishing. And you might find that an odd expression. But speaking to a whole world, some of which shares our worldview and vocabulary and some of which doesn't, we have to say that you need vocabulary that is able to spark individuals who come from very different backgrounds. This idea of human flourishing means we need to say, what does it mean to be a full person? The glory of God is man fully alive, St. Irenaeus said. We've got the best lines, we do, because we've been at it longer. But this idea of being fully alive, this idea of true human flourishing means that nothing that is going to be open to that flourishing should be cut off, whether that is an individual's life or potential, their abilities of growth, etc. That's an incredibly broad brush. But it also means that we can say to individuals, what is it that you need to be growing into the fullness of a human person? That's the culture that we wish to engender. It is entirely against those people that would be mechanistic, that say that the kind of model that you have for a person is a type of machine, whether that is going to be, you know, an old-fashioned mechanistic model or whether it's going to be a contemporary mechanistic model, whether all you're worried about is what's, you know, above the neck and you're talking about people as some kind of quantum computers or whatever. The irrelevance of that is such that we just have to say to people, every one of those models has been completely wrong. We need to think of totally different ways about being able to recognize the human person.